It is 2 o'clock in the morning. The house is completely silent, except for the faint, rhythmic hum of a refrigerator in the other room. We assume it means agreeing with a list of historical facts and theological claims with 100% mental certainty, much higher than passing a theological quiz. But nowhere is this translation trap more dangerous than when we encounter the dense, sweeping arguments of the patterer, early church's greatest theologian. This brings us to the most famous and most fiercely debated letters in the biblical library. A man paces across a stone floor in the city of Corinth, dictating a letter that will eventually travel to the capital of the empire. He is constructing the most dense, carefully argued theological document of the early Christian movement. His name is Paul, and when modern readers open his letters to the Romans and the Galatians, they often fundamentally misunderstand his central argument. For centuries, we have read Paul as if he were fighting a battle between physical effort and mental stillness. We assume the phrase works of the law refers to trying to earn your way into heaven by being a moral person. We assume faith means relaxing, doing no physical work, and simply agreeing in your mind that Jesus died for you. We treat Paul as the champion of intellectual belief over physical action. But we have already seen that in the ancient world, pistis cannot exist without action. It is the clasped hands of loyalty. So what is Paul actually arguing against? He is not contrasting physical action with mental stillness. Under this modern definition, faith is a fragile state of mind. If a piece of contradictory evidence appears, or if a tragedy strikes, both sides require action. He is contrasting two entirely different systems of allegiance. When Paul writes about the works of the law, he is addressing a very specific first-century conflict. In places like Galatia and Rome, the early church was fracturing. Certain Jewish believers were demanding that Gentile converts adopt the traditional identity markers of the Torah, specifically circumcision, dietary restrictions, and Sabbath observance. These were the physical badges that proved a person's allegiance to the Sinai covenant. They were the boundary lines that determined who was truly inside the family of God. Paul writes to shatter those boundaries. He argues that humanity is no longer justified by adopting the ethnic badges of the Old Covenant. Instead, they are justified by pistis. To prove his point, Paul points backward in history. He reminds his readers of Abraham. Abraham was justified, declared righteous by God. Centuries before the law of Moses was even written, Abraham had no dietary laws, no Sabbath rules, and no Torah to follow. What did he have? He had pistis. When God made an impossible promise, Abraham walked out of his tent, looked at the stars, and chose to align his physical life with the reliability of God. His faith was not a perfect intellectual certainty. He stumbled. He laughed at God's timing. That does not make logical sense. The dial turns down. The certainty cracks. The faith is compromised. The problem is not that the person, and he even tried to force the promise to happen through his own strength. But his foundational allegiance never shifted. He stayed in the relationship. He kept his hands clasped to the ultimate patron. Paul is telling the ancient world that there is now only one badge of entry into the family of God: absolute, embodied allegiance to the resurrected King. You do not become a child of Abraham by changing your diet or physically altering your body to match the law of Moses. You become a child of Abraham by pledging your loyalty to the Jewish Messiah. This is a massive shift. Paul is not telling the Romans to simply change their minds. He is telling them to change their king. In an empire that demanded absolute fides to Caesar, Paul is calling the church to pledge their ultimate pistis to Jesus. But this creates a terrifying problem for the honest reader. If biblical faith requires active loyalty and embodied trust, rather than just checking a mental box, we are in trouble. Human loyalty is deeply fragile. Our allegiance wavers. The symbol of the clasped hands is beautiful when we are strong. But what happens when our grip fails? Lying awake in the dark is spiritually weak. The problem is that they are measuring their relationship with God using a definition. If our salvation depends entirely on our ability to maintain perfect, unbroken loyalty. The anxiety of the midnight bedroom returns. We are simply carrying a heavier burden. Paul knows this, and to answer it, he anchors his letters on a specific, highly debated Greek phrase. It is a subtle grammatical pivot, but it completely reverses the weight of the gospel. The entire weight of Paul's argument balances on a three-word Greek phrase that has divided scholars for decades. As Paul dictates his letters, he repeatedly uses the phrase pistis, Iesu, Christou. For hundreds of years, most English Bibles translated this phrase in a way that placed the ultimate burden entirely on the reader. They translated it as faith in Jesus Christ. If you are a modern reader, and you have just learned that pistis actually means relational loyalty and embodied allegiance, that traditional translation is terrifying. If you are saved by your faith in Christ, and faith means your personal allegiance to the King, then your standing with God depends on your ability to maintain perfect loyalty. The moment your loyalty wavers, the moment you stumble, the moment you fail to act faithfully, the grip slips, the pledge is broken, you are lost, that the biblical authors would not even recognize. When we open our English Bibles and read the word faith, we are looking through ad. If this is what Paul meant, he has not delivered us from the burden of the law. He has simply given us a heavier, more exhausting law. But there is a hidden mechanism inside the Greek language. The phrase pistis Iesu Christou can be translated in two different ways, depending on how you understand the grammar. It can mean faith in Christ, meaning the trust you generate and direct toward Him. Or it can be translated as the faithfulness of Christ. Over the last few decades, a massive shift has occurred in biblical scholarship. Many leading scholars and newer translations are recognizing that, in the most crucial passages of Romans and Galatians, Paul is not talking about your faith at all. He is talking about the unwavering, covenant-keeping faithfulness of Jesus. We are not justified by our perfect allegiance to God. We are justified by the perfect allegiance that Jesus demonstrated on our behalf. To see this, look at the Garden of Gethsemane on the night before the crucifixion. Jesus is kneeling in the dirt, sweating blood in the cold air, physically crushed by the terror of what is about to happen. He asks the Father if there is any other way. But then, he bows his head and says, "Not my will, but yours be done." That is pistis. That is perfect. Embodied allegiance. Even in the face of death, Jesus kept his hands clasped to the Father, a modern lens that distorts the original image. We assume Jesus and the apostles were demanding perfect intellectual agreement. We assume they were asking. He was the only human being in history to completely fulfill the loyalty that humanity owed to its Creator. When Paul says that we are saved by pistis Christou, he is delivering the ultimate relief. The bedrock of your salvation is not the strength of your own loyalty. It is the unyielding fidelity of the Messiah. He stood in your place as the perfectly faithful human. The symbol of the ancient Roman pledge was two hands gripping each other. But in the gospel, the two hands are not equal in strength. When you reach out to God in your broken, inconsistent loyalty, you are not grabbing the hand of a peer. You are grabbing the hand of a king whose grip is absolute. Your faith is merely the empty hand, reaching out to receive his perfect faithfulness. Up to this point, the question has been historical and grammatical. Now it becomes deeply personal. If the foundation of the universe is his faithfulness, rather than our perfect certainty, the entire way we live the Christian life must change. The pressure to generate flawless internal belief disappears. But a new question immediately takes its place. If true, pistis is a physical allegiance. What do we do with our own internal failures? What happens when the weight of life tests people to believe in impossible things without any evidence, and to never allow a question to cross their minds? The symbol of the clasped hands, because in an ordinary life, suffering will come. The silence of God will be felt, and our minds will inevitably ask terrifying questions. We must confront what actually happens when we doubt. But if our salvation rests entirely on the faithfulness of Jesus, a quiet fear often remains. What exactly happens when our own minds refuse to cooperate? Some might look at this ancient definition of pistis, this demand for fierce, embodied loyalty, and feel an even deeper shame. The strongest reasonable objection to this understanding of faith is this: if faith is allegiance, does questioning God mean we are committing spiritual treason? If we struggle to understand why a tragic diagnosis was given, or why a long prayer was met with a wall of silence, have we broken the pledge? This is the most dangerous misunderstanding of the modern church. It assumes that loyalty requires silence. In our modern culture, when we doubt a political leader or a system, we immediately withdraw our support. We cancel our allegiance. We assume that if our minds are not completely convinced, our bodies must walk away. If faith is merely a psychological state of absolute certainty, then any doubt is a catastrophic failure. But the writers of the New Testament were not speaking English, and they were not operating in a modern Western culture. They were writing in Greek. A single question shatters the fragile glass of your belief. You are either perfectly certain or you are failing. But if faith is a relational allegiance, the entire framework changes. In a genuine relationship, asking hard questions is not a sign of abandonment. It is the proof of intimacy. Look at the ancient poetry of the Hebrew Bible. The Psalms are filled with writers screaming into the dark, my God, why have you forsaken me? How long? O Lord, will you forget me forever?" If faith meant perfect mental tranquility, these writers would be spiritual failures. Instead, their agonizing questions were canonized as Holy Scripture. Why? Because of where they directed their anger. They did not abandon the covenant. They did not walk away to find another God. They brought their confusion directly to the patron. They pounded their fists on the chest of the king. Think of Jacob wrestling with the divine presence in the dirt until daybreak. He is injured, exhausted, and desperate. Yet he refuses to release his grip. That is not treason. That is pistis. It is the stubborn refusal to let go of the relationship. Even when the intellect is completely in the dark, the distinction is crucial. Doubt is a crisis of intellect. Infidelity is a crisis of allegiance. And they were using a specific word that has been dangerously flattened and hollowed out by the time it reached our modern dictionaries. You can struggle profoundly with the former while fiercely maintaining the latter. You can stand beside a hospital bed, entirely unable to make logical sense of the suffering in front of you, and still say to God, "I do not understand what you are doing, but I am staying with you. I am not walking away." That is the exact fidelity Jesus honors. The ancient symbol of the clasped hands does not require you to smile and pretend everything is fine. It only requires you to maintain the grip. But knowing this theoretically is one thing. Living it out in the quiet, unglamorous moments of life is another. How do we practically build this kind of enduring allegiance in an ordinary week? When the pressure rises and the intellect fractures, how do we choose loyalty over certainty? This is where the ancient theology becomes intensely personal. How does a person actually practice this ancient loyalty on a normal Tuesday? When the theology stops echoing in a lecture hall and lands on a kitchen table covered in unpaid bills, or in the sterile air of a doctor's waiting room. How do we choose pistis? The first step is to completely abandon the habit of checking your own spiritual temperature. For years, many Christians have treated faith like an internal thermometer. The central question is not whether you can force your brain to achieve perfect psychological certainty. The question is what the biblical writers actually meant. Every morning, they look inward, trying to measure how much certainty they feel. If they feel deeply peaceful and completely convinced of God's goodness, they believe they have strong faith. If they feel anxious, cynical, or terrified of the future, they assume their faith is failing. This constant self-measurement is not only exhausting, it is entirely unbiblical. If faith is allegiance, you do not need to feel completely peaceful to be completely faithful. The practical mechanism of biblical belief begins with absolute honesty. When you face a moment of deep uncertainty, recognize what is happening in your mind. Name the fear out loud. Tell God exactly what you do not understand. Do not try to sanitize your prayers, or pretend that you possess a confidence you lack. Remember that the King you serve already knows the limits of your human understanding. Then, you must deliberately shift the burden. Stop trying to manufacture a feeling of absolute conviction from within your own mind. Look outward. Look at the historical, covenant-keeping fidelity of Jesus. Remind yourself that your standing in the kingdom does not depend on your psychological perfection. It depends entirely on his unwavering grip. Finally, make the next faithful choice in the physical world. This is what pisteuo actually looks like in action. You do not have to conquer every intellectual doubt before you can obey. True pistis is stepping forward even when your hands are shaking. A person lies awake in the dark, staring up at the shadows cast on the ceiling by a street lamp outside, when they ask their readers to have faith. What if the biblical concept of belief was never meant to be a measurement? It is choosing to extend forgiveness when you still feel the sting of betrayal. It is choosing to provide for your family when you feel entirely hollow. It is walking into a church building when the music feels empty to you, simply because you have pledged your loyalty to the people gathered there. You take the action not because you feel an overwhelming emotional sense of divine presence, but because you have sworn allegiance to the true patron. Action often precedes feeling. Loyalty is proven in the dark. When you understand this, the crushing weight of modern Christianity evaporates. You are no longer required to be an intellectual gymnast, constantly fighting to suppress every logical question that enters your mind. You are no longer commanded to achieve perfect mental stillness before you are allowed to participate in the kingdom. You are only asked to remain in the relationship. You are only asked to trust the character of the King, and to move your body in the direction of his commands. The contradiction that began this investigation is finally resolved. Faith is not the absence of questions. It is the presence of loyalty within them, which brings us all the way back to the beginning. It brings us back to the dark room, the silent house, and the midnight struggle. Step back and look at the vast landscape we have traveled. We began in the isolated anxiety of the modern mind, of how few doubts you have. What if we have entirely misunderstood what it means to trust God? This is not ultimately a story, trapped by a definition of belief that demanded perfect intellectual certainty. We walked into the dust of a Galilean crowd to see what physical, active trust actually looks like. We uncovered the linguistic accident that separated our actions from our allegiance, and we stood in the dirt of Gethsemane to witness the perfect, embodied fidelity of Jesus, the only human who ever kept the covenant completely. When you compress this entire journey, three profound truths emerge from the ancient text. First, biblical faith is not a fragile psychological state that shatters the moment you encounter a difficult question. Second, doubt is not an act of spiritual treason that disqualifies you from the family of God. And third, your ultimate salvation is not anchored to your ability to hold on to God perfectly. It is anchored to the unyielding, historical faithfulness of the Messiah who holds on to you. This completely transforms the midnight struggle. We return to the person lying awake at 2 o'clock in the morning, staring at the shadows on the ceiling. The house is still silent. The difficult circumstance has not magically vanished. The theological question remains unanswered. The heart is still beating just a little too fast in the quiet room. But the person in the bed is no longer fighting a desperate battle to artificially manufacture perfect conviction. The ancient Roman symbol of the clasped hands, the dextrarum iunctio, about mental agreement. It is a story about relational allegiance. To see the difference, we have to look closely at what history has done. Has entered the dark room, but it carries a completely new meaning. You are no longer lying there terrified that your grip is slipping. You realize that your hand is small, your strength is failing, and your fingers are trembling. But you also realize that your hand is entirely enveloped within the massive, unyielding grip of a king who refuses to let you go. When you find yourself in that bed, exhausted by your own questions, you can finally stop fighting yourself. You can stop confusing your intellectual limits with a spiritual failure. What have you mistaken for a lack of faith? Have you assumed that because you cannot make logical sense of your suffering, you have somehow abandoned the journey, if your mind is swirling with doubt, yet your spirit still stubbornly whispers, "I belong to you," you have not failed. You are simply a human being operating inside a covenant, secured by someone much stronger than you. You do not have to conquer the darkness before you can belong to the kingdom. You do not have to banish every shadow of uncertainty before you are allowed to pray. This is not ultimately a story about mental agreement. It is a story about relational allegiance. The pressure is off. The crushing burden of having to understand everything about the universe before you can trust. The Creator has been permanently lifted by the obedience of Christ. You can bring your questions, your exhaustion, and your fractured certainty directly to Him, to the concept of belief. Today, if you say you believe in something, you usually mean you think it is factually true. He is not threatened by your humanity. He is the ultimate patron who has already provided the provision, and He only asks that you do not walk away. Faith is not the absence of questioning in the dark. It is the choice to get out of bed, trust His grip, and walk faithfully in the morning. If this study has helped you see Scripture more clearly and lifted the burden of perfect certainty, consider subscribing to the channel. Share this message with someone who feels exhausted by their own doubts, and leave a comment below about how the ancient meaning of pistis changes the way you read the Bible, even if you cannot see it. It is an event that happens almost entirely behind your eyes. But in the first century, faith was not a private feeling. It was something you did with your hands, your feet, and your life. To understand why so many of us feel like our faith is failing, and to find the relief that the biblical text actually offers, we have to leave the modern anxiety of the midnight bedroom. We have to travel back into the dust, the noise, and the politics of the ancient Greco-Roman world. We have to discover what it actually meant to give someone your pistis. Step out of the isolated, quiet bedroom and into the loud, physical reality of a first-century Mediterranean city. Their heart is beating slightly faster than it should. They are turning over a painful circumstance. A quiet theological doubt. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke, roasting meat, and the dust of unpaved streets. In this ancient world, there are no social safety nets. There are no government assistance programs, no insurance policies, and no modern banking systems. If a famine strikes, if a business fails, or if an illness prevents a person from working, they cannot rely on an abstract system. They can only rely on a network. Survival depended entirely on a social structure known as patronage. It was a formal, binding relationship between two unequal people. A wealthy or powerful patron would provide land, food, financial support, or legal protection to a lesser client. In return, the client did not merely say a polite thank you and walk away. The client was expected to provide lifelong public honor, political support, and unwavering loyalty to the patron. The invisible glue that held this entire society together was a powerful Roman concept called fides, which was translated into the Greek language as pistis. This is the exact word that our English Bibles translate as faith. In the ancient marketplace, pistis was not a private religious feeling. It was a concrete, relational reality. It meant trustworthiness, reliability, and fidelity. If you had pistis toward your patron, you were dependable. You honored your obligations. You aligned your actions with their leadership. You were faithful, or a prayer that has seemingly gone unanswered for months. They closed their eyes and tried desperately to manufacture a feeling of absolute certainty. We can actually see what this concept looked like to the original audience. The Romans did not symbolize fides or pistis with an image of a glowing heart, or a person sitting in deep intellectual contemplation. If you held a Roman coin in your hand, or if you walked past a public monument, you would often see pistis represented by a very specific image, two right hands firmly clasped together. This gesture, known in Latin as the dextrarum iunctio, was the physical embodiment of a pledge. It was the ancient equivalent of a binding contract. When two people clasped hands, they were entering into a mutual agreement of trust and reliability. The patron promised to provide and protect. The client promised to remain loyal and obedient. When a first-century person claimed to have pistis towards someone, they were not saying, "I have mentally concluded that you exist without any logical doubts." They were saying, "I am swearing my allegiance to you. I am binding my life to your life. And I will act faithfully toward you in public." Faith was not something you felt. Faith was something you did. It was an active, embodied trust. This drastically shifts the landscape of the New Testament. It means that when the biblical writers use the word pistis, they were not describing a fragile psychological state of perfect certainty. They try to force their brain to stop asking the question that is keeping them awake. They have been taught, either directly or indirectly. They were describing a robust, relational loyalty. They were describing the clasped hands. But if pistis meant allegiance and reliability in the ancient world, how did Jesus use the word? When he walks into a Judean village, heals a broken body, and tells the person that their faith has saved them, he is not congratulating them on passing a theological exam. He is looking for something far deeper than mental agreement. And that ancient definition completely changes what we see when we open the Gospels. Watch this physical definition of trust come alive in the dust of a Galilean street. A massive crowd is pressing against Jesus. The air is suffocating with the heat of the day and the weight of human bodies pushing from every side. A woman who has been bleeding for 12 years forces her way through the chaos. She is physically exhausted, financially ruined, and socially isolated by purity laws that declare her constantly unclean. She does not stop to analyze her theological certainty. She is not carrying a systematic theology in her mind. She simply reaches out her hand and touches the edge of his garment. Immediately, the healing occurs. Jesus stops, looks around, finds her in the crowd, and says, "Daughter, your faith has made you well." That faith is the opposite of doubt. Therefore, the quiet anxiety sitting heavy in their chest must be a spiritual failure. Notice what he does not say. He does not ask her to articulate a perfect doctrine of the incarnation. He does not test her for hidden doubts. Dozens of people in that crowd were physically bumping into Jesus, but only she touched him with pistis. She brought her brokenness to him in an act of desperate allegiance. Her faith was not a lack of internal questions. Her faith was a physical movement toward the only person who could save her. A few chapters later, the pattern repeats, with a completely different kind of person. A Roman centurion approaches Jesus, asking for his paralyzed servant to be healed. As a military officer, this man breathes the air of Roman fides. He knows exactly how the ancient system of loyalty and patronage works. He understands the chain of command. He tells Jesus that he does not even need to enter the house. He only needs to speak the word from a distance. Jesus turns to the crowd and declares that he has not found such great pistis anywhere in Israel. Why? What did the centurion actually do? He correctly identified who was in charge. He recognized that Jesus carried ultimate divine authority, and he aligned his allegiance to that reality. His faith was not a blind leap into the dark. It was a clear-eyed recognition. If they just had more faith, the questions would disappear. They gripped the edge of the blanket, feeling as though of the true king. He knew that when the ultimate patron speaks, the physical world must obey. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus never treats faith as an intellectual puzzle. He never requires perfect psychological tranquility before he moves. He treats pistis as a relational posture. He looks for people who are willing to grasp his hand, even if their own hand is shaking. Faith is an action taken in a specific direction. It is the decision to place your weight on his reliability, rather than your own resources. When we read these stories with the ancient understanding of pistis, the message is completely unified. Action, trust, and loyalty are all woven together in a single Greek word. To have faith is to act faithfully. But if the concept was this unified in the ancient world, why does it feel so fragmented today? Why do modern readers constantly separate what they believe in their heads from how they live in their bodies. The answer lies in what happened when the Greek text met the English language. Centuries later, as the biblical manuscripts were translated for a modern audience, a linguistic accident occurred. The unified concept of pistis was shattered. To understand why we feel so disconnected from this active loyalty today, we have to look at the translation trap that split the meaning of the text. They are slowly losing their grip on God. For most of the modern, English-speaking world, this is exactly what the concept of faith has become. The problem is not that modern Bible translators made a deliberate mistake. The problem is that the English language lacks the architectural structure to hold the weight of the original Greek. When a first-century reader unrolled a manuscript of a gospel, they did not see three disconnected religious concepts. They saw one unified root word doing all the heavy lifting. If the writer needed a noun, they used pistis, the pledge of reliability and trust. If they needed an adjective to describe someone who kept that pledge, they used pistos, faithful. And if they needed a verb to describe the action of living out that pledge, they used pisteuo. They all look the same. They all sound the same. They all carry the exact same demand for relational loyalty. In the Greek mind, the noun, the adjective, and the verb were permanently locked together. But when you try to bring that unified family of words into English, you immediately hit a linguistic wall. English has an excellent equivalent for the noun, faith. English also has a good prize equivalent for the adjective, faithful. But English does not possess a verb form of the word faith. You cannot grammatically say, I faith you, or she faithed the promise. The language simply does not allow it. To solve this grammatical problem, centuries of English translators had to borrow a completely different word to serve as the action. They reached into the English vocabulary and selected the word believe. That single linguistic pivot shifted. We treat it as a psychological exercise. We have defined faith as an intellectual dial that we are entirely responsible for turning up. The trajectory of Western theology. In modern English, the word believe is almost entirely intellectual. It describes the cognitive process of accepting a piece of information as factual. You might say, I believe it will rain tomorrow, or I believe the capital of France is Paris. You are simply stating that your brain has evaluated a claim and agreed with it. It requires no physical movement. It requires no relational loyalty. It requires no clasped hands. You can believe a fact while lying awake in the dark, perfectly still. But in the ancient world, pisteuo meant getting out of the bed. It meant visibly committing yourself to the patron. By substituting the active Greek verb with the English word believe, we accidentally stripped the ancient word of its physical demand. We divorced the action from the allegiance. We inadvertently created a religious culture where a person could believe in Jesus exactly the same way they believe in a historical fact, without ever actually binding their life to his kingdom. We turned faith into a static mental possession, rather than a moving loyalty. The biblical writers would not understand this division. To them, you cannot separate faith from faithfulness. You cannot claim to hold pistis as an internal feeling while refusing to perform pisteuo as a relational action. The action is the proof of the allegiance. If believing is not merely a mental agreement, but a declaration of embodied loyalty, it changes how we read every page of the New Testament. The stakes suddenly become